this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. This is viewers orchid questions time, number blah blah blah. I will keep the sequence going because I just quite like the idea of that, but not necessarily up here, just on the video title. Because once I sit down at the computer to process it, I can see what the previous one was. From here I can't. Right, it's a fair assortment today, and it should, in theory, it should clear them down, and I think I can get them all into one without being silly too long. So that should be okay. So we'll need some more if we're going to have one next week, because I think this is most of them now. I may not finish it. You know what I'm like if I get sidetracked and all that. Right, before we start, there's a little update on an item that's sort of hanging around, which was the idea of contacting my friend Peter White to find out about the virus test kits. I think I might have sent him a contact email via the website, but because I wasn't sure that worked, I went round the back door to his assistant Sam, who eventually is supposedly going to take over the business. But I've got a sort of backdoor Facebook sort of thing message that I can get at, and I get a quick answer. That's the thing. So I just basically asked if she could contact Peter, because they've got no shows or anything going on, so they're just sitting around thumb twiddling, I suspect. Basically the response is that the company that supplies them, Peter used to sell them as a one virus test kit, not in sets or packs or anything like that. The company that provide them have now decided they have a minimum order figure of £400, not including postage. So as far as Peter is concerned, they are highly likely to go out of business now, unless they have some very large trade people that put in constant large orders. Otherwise they're just going to go out of business. They've effectively excluded all of the amateur growers and everybody that might want to buy a pack of 25 or anything like that. They've just excluded all of those people. So he's reasonably confident they will now go out of business. Bad business decision, but I'm certainly not ordering that many. That would test all the plants though, wouldn't it? No, we're not going down that path. So virus test kits is out. That ain't happening. Right, here we go then. A little series of questions from Cloud Forest Vibes, Orchids and More. First of all, it really subjects itself around Dendrobium Sennilli, and why is it an awkward one? It's difficult to pinpoint it, and I don't think it's one thing. I can actually get that one down because it's not far away. Mine currently is not doing that well, and the reason it isn't at the moment is blatantly obvious. It's too damn hot. You notice I've got all the kit off. Am I dripping? Am I wringing wet? No. This is the first day where the temperature's dropped. It's 22 in here. Comfortable. I could do with it being a little bit higher for the plants, but for me that's perfect. Now my Dendrobium Sennilli is losing a few leaves. These are on last year's canes. But what it is doing is going absolutely mad with new growths, and I mean mad. You know, there's little new growths popping out all over the place, including on older parts of the plant, mainly over in this area. So it's pushing out new growths. Also, I see white roots in quite a few places, so it's also growing some roots. This dendrobium is not a big root grower. I've never seen one with a massive root system. It seems to have just about enough to survive. And therein could be one of its difficulties, because if it naturally doesn't produce a good root system, every single one of them is valuable. You start losing a few and it can't hydrate itself and it can't get the nutrients in, and that could become a vicious circle. So it then hasn't got enough energy to grow some more roots and all that. But it's not a vigorous grower. I won't say it's painfully slow. It plods away in the background. It needs good airflow. I've only found that mine grows best up here right in the line of fire of my circulating fan. It likes to move. In the winter time, it's not a rester as such. It does have a cooler winter where it comes from, but it doesn't get the water dramatically reduced or anything like that. So I keep this ticking over in the winter. Probably gets watered about every 10 days, something like that. And whether it gets any food, if it gets any food, it will be a very light amount, but it's dependent on what it does. And so far, since I've had this one, during the winter there are growths progressing. So I'm not withholding food, but I do keep it low because it's not growing very quickly. This seems comfortable in cooler temperatures with good airflow, and it doesn't need bright light. I wouldn't say it grows in the shade, but it doesn't need bright light. So mine lives up here with its back to the bright light. So although it's up near the roof, I've got, my sun goes round, yeah? So if it was facing that way, it would be facing that bright light, but by turning it round that way, it's facing away from it. So it gets less light. It's not so intense. But it is a little bit finicky. I've known an awful lot of good growers give up on that. They've tried several, failed and thought, blow it, we'll try something different. It seems to do okay, and we had some nice blooms at the beginning of the year, didn't we? That was good. That was the one that went into the competition and didn't, because the guy lost the email. So that's that. Oncidium types, that will include intergenerics, non-bloomers that seem to be growing very well. Well, the obvious answer that may not be the right answer in all cases is when you've got Oncidium types that just basically refuse to bloom, it'll be a culture issue if they appear to be growing well. And the obvious one that you always say is, oh, try giving them more light. That's not always the answer. Sometimes they're getting too much, like mine last year. Yeah, they got too much and started washing the colour out of the leaves. Well, that just reduces their ability to do everything, including feed themselves, because they haven't got the green, the chlorophyll. So, but most orchids, and a lot of these come into this category, they don't mind so much how hot it gets. The odontoglossums and the intergenerics with a high percentage of odonts in like it cooler. You get them too warm, they just slow right down, almost to a standstill. That would include producing spikes. Yeah? But putting that to one side, most of the Oncidiums and the intergenerics do not mind the heat, providing the humidity is good. They don't mind bright light, but it can get too intense for them. And again, the odonts lower down with the light, lower down with the temperatures. They do like some air movement. It doesn't have to be dramatic. But the one thing they do like is a good drop in temperature at night. As I said, the daytime, they don't mind the heat a bit. They don't mind if it's not too warm. Yeah, but they like that difference between day and night. Yeah, so like at times like this, I'm not getting much of a difference. You know, I'm holding it at around 27 during the day, but during the past week or more, the nights have only dropped down to 22, 23. That isn't really a big enough gap. They need a bigger gap. They need a lower drop at night. Now, normally in the UK, that's not a problem, but so a few things. They can be overfed. They can be underfed. Word won't come. Not enough food. So a balanced feed when they're actively growing. They don't need loads of food put on them or in them when they're not growing. And Oncidiums will often have a period where they've just finished their blooms, you've cut your spikes off, and you look at the plant and it's doing nothing. No new growth started yet, no new roots growing, it's just sitting there. Well, when it's doing that, it doesn't need a lot of food. And if you put a lot of food in the pot, it'll accumulate, and then you start whacking your roots. Yeah, so that's a chat about those. Right, Paul Saunders sent a list. It's bigger than my flipping shopping list. As we're started off with, as we're heading towards autumn, yeah, not yet, mate, but am I considering any changes for autumn? Yes, I did it last time I watered. What happens? sun, midsummer, as you head to autumn, so instead of coming in the top, it starts to be more intense on the sides. So some plants got moved back from the glass because when the sun's high, they've got plants above them. Now as soon as it starts coming in the side, they're not getting the plants above them, are they? Because it's coming in through the shelves. So some got moved back. That's all I've done so far. One time way down the line, I'll have to think about getting the heater out, and I'll get it out before I need it to make sure it flipping works. And if it doesn't, then I've got time to get another one before it starts chilling right down. I will probably get the grow lights out again this year, or they are a faff. I wonder whether they're worth it sometimes, but there's that to think about. But do I change my feed was the real question. You know, it is said that raising the potassium going into the autumn helps the plants. Yeah, that's an old school, I've got an allotment, I've got some tomato plants, you know, old gardener type concept that, like for my bonsai, it would be true. If I up the potassium as we head into autumn, I'll put some strength and some cold resistance into those plants. They're going to stay out there all winter. Yeah, these aren't. These are in here. And who says they're all going to shut down for the winter? They're not. So why do we need to alter our food as we go into the autumn? Yes, they're plants, but I don't change anything. I reduce the overall amount, yes, but I don't change the balance. And strictly speaking, if you want to be more accurate, you don't increase the potassium, you reduce the nitrogen. You can leave the potassium the same. It's the difference between the two that's important. The nitrogen is for plants that are growing, actively growing. Well, things are stopping that in the autumn. So you could understand they don't need the nitrogen. It's not really an increase in potassium, it's a drop in nitrogen, leaving the potassium higher in the balancing terms. But I don't do that. Some do. Some actively pursue that path. You know, I don't. I've never seen the need personally. Right, how often do I change the moss on my mounts? I don't. A simple one, that's that done. I suppose I better say why I don't. Because I don't put a lot on, and on the ones that have got very little, it changes it ends up becoming almost non-existent or is live moss. A live moss will never need changing. It's alive, it's part of the root system effectively. But I don't change my moss. Now, I'll show you one that could do with the moss being changed. That one. That could do with the moss being changed. Why? Because it looks really old and tired and manky. It's only algae on the surface. There's nothing wrong with the moss underneath. Doesn't need changing. I don't think I've ever changed the moss. I have unmounted some plants before, at which point the moss did get changed. The reason for that was on some of my larger mounts there were snails tucked in behind the root mass. Yeah? And I've got some now, which I'm going to have to deal with. They're difficult. Those little, I think they're called little bush snails. They're little, like the fossilised things that you see, a curly snail rather than a pointy one. Flat curly one. Yeah, so I don't. How much moss? Well, you gauge it to the plant, really, and what sort of size root system it's eventually going to have. Oncidium types, I mean this is a recently mounted one that may or may not live. Is that new growth growing? I suppose it is. That didn't have a very good root system at all. It's a small plant. It's capable of growing quite a bit bigger than that. But I'm not expecting it to do that well, it never has. I'm trying it on a mount to see if it will do better. That, for the size of the plant's got quite a bit of moss. It's an Oncidium. They have a large root system for the size of the plant. Some plants don't. Are you going to let go? Right. This is my Hercoglossum. This is a large plant. So I've backed up so much now I can't see the camera. This is a large plant, the size of the root system. It's just this bit here. That's the root system. It's only ever had that size root system. It's actually grown a lot more this year than it normally does. So not all plants, and that's got more moss than I would normally put on a dendrobium, and that was because it wouldn't grow any roots. So I needed to encourage it, I think is the expression, which the extra moss did encourage it. It varies. Some plants get very little moss. It depends what they're going to do. A Cattleya on a mount would have very little moss. I wouldn't bother much. That's not a very good example of a plant, is there? Is there a better one to look at? So that's one of my sort of recovery type ones. This is the one with the what you call it in it, little lemon drops that's just finished blooming effectively. There's the moss up under there. It's just that tiny little bit. There's very little moss on there, and most of the roots are hanging in the air anyway, and a lot of them are just bare on the mount. Well, that's happy. It's happy enough that while it was still in bloom, it started a new growth, and it hasn't done that before. And as this was the one that was in bloom, I was expecting a new growth to come out of there, and it is. So it's now got two new growths, and it hasn't done that before. Well, it wouldn't do that if it wasn't happy enough, would it? It would just complain and not grow very well. So the moss varies. You've just got to judge it on how big you expect the root system to get, type of plant. If I was mounting a brassica, for instance, I would need quite a large mount. The plant would need to be quite centrally placed, and it would need a reasonable bit of moss, because that plant is going to get big and they have large root systems that spread out in all directions. So some of them are going to be aerial. So to try and hold them in, I would put quite a good moss ball round a brassica, and then hopefully a lot of the roots would decide to stay there where they can get hydrated, whereas hanging in the air they might not. So that's that. Size of mounts again, how big's the plant going to get? And if we go back to that Hercoglossum, that's a big plant. Has it got a really big mount? No, because it doesn't have a big root system. Yeah? Do you want to be silly? That's a silly size mount for the size of the plant. But I was told this plant can grow incredibly big. So this was in preparation of that happening, which it hasn't yet. This is the Ancelia Africana. And it has grown a reasonable size new growth, and there's another one coming up the back and another one coming out the side. So it's growing and it's pushing new roots out. But it doesn't look like it's going to fill that mount, not anytime soon. So, you know, maybe it's not going to grow as big as it's expected to. So it looks a bit silly on that mount, but under normal circumstances, try and keep the roots on the mount. Doesn't always work. My Conico, there are more roots off of the mount than on it. They're hanging right down to here. Yeah? And this one has a habit of pushing its new growths out a little bit away from the base. They are technically kikis, like this one. Yeah? Halfway up the cane. But most of the roots are now not on the mount, and then suddenly it started growing some more and pushed through the moss and came out here again and round here. So, you know, that's using all of its mount, but it hasn't gone round the back yet, so it's not a mount that's too big. It's okay. This one could have done with a bigger mount. Now this is only a Nobili, and it's not a giant Nobili. Notice that's probably about as large as the canes ever get. It's not a giant, but look at the flipping root system it's pushed out. And the plant was placed halfway up the mount. It could have done with going up a bit higher to leave more room for roots, but I didn't know it was going to grow like that at the time. Again, relatively small amount of moss. Doesn't need a lot. It's dendrobium. Right, that'll do for that. Oh, and things like Telumnias, you grow them on a mount the size of your thumb. As long as they've got something to hang on to, they're happy. They don't need a lot of room, but some do. Well, I was asked to show my failures. Well, bear in mind we had a night of the long knives. A lot of those do now not exist, so there are nowhere near as many failures anymore. And I'll perhaps go over the ones doing poorly. This is a more nicer title for a video, those not doing so well, rather than miserable failure. But I'll do those separately, so I'm not doing that now. Right. Some orchids that rebloom on the same growth. Dendrobium Nobilis will fill in the gaps. They'll bloom once and then they'll fill in the gaps the following year. And if there's still any gaps, possibly a couple will chuck out in the middle of summer. The Phalaenopsis type dendrobiums, Kingianum types, those, you know, with those little things, Delicatum, Kingianum, Berioda, name but a few, they do. My giant Chrysotoxum up the back, that pushes out growths on the same cane for a few years, a few consecutive years. My Farmeri Griffithianum cross, that produces spikes on the same cane over a period of time. So there's a few that do. Cattleyas don't. Oncidiums don't, unless they produce a second spike up the other side of the pseudobulb, which can occasionally happen with a delay between the two. But under normal circumstances, no. Yeah, so some do, some don't. What about those that don't and never will? Well, we'll go back to Cattleyas again. A Cattleya will produce a new growth. May or may not have a sheath. Some Cattleyas chuck buds straight out the top of the pseudobulb, no sheath, just buds. Some of them get to that stage and don't produce buds and don't produce a sheath. Well, given a short amount of time, they're not going to bloom. They had their chance and they only get one. And you'll get Cattleyas that produce a lovely big sheath, almost as big as the leaf, and it'll sit there and won't produce buds. And others will sit there and then they do. Yeah? So don't give up on a sheath. It may be blind, it may be that that particular Cattleya type has a delay between the sheath forming and the buds being produced. Yeah? Some do. So yeah, that's one. Others that don't, it's difficult really. It's mainly the Cattleya types. There's some of the longer cane dendrobiums, like the anosmum types. I've got anosmum, nesta, primulinum, phyllum. They flower on the previous year's new cane. So you grow them nice and strong all through your growing period. They have their rest or semi-rest through the winter. In most cases they will dump their leaves and they'll produce their blooms on those canes from the previous year in the spring, late winter, early spring. And that's their lot. They will very rarely ever bloom on those canes again. So you need to grow some more the following year. So that's that. Right. Pixmala asked about bleach strength. Well, we went into this and I had some help from others. That'll do. No, some people want it more than that. If people want more than that, then that'll do is not good enough, is it? Because they've asked. So I was asked. Basically, the killing strength of bleach is dependent on the active ingredient, which I'll have to read out. I've never heard of it. Sodium hypochlorite is the bleach bit. Yeah. Now, bleach in this country seems to be a bit below 5%. Sorry, I got a mental block there. The stuff I've got is 4.6. Well, that's around 5, isn't it? And the killing strength for that would need to have about 8 to 9 parts water to 1 part bleach. Yeah. Now, some bleach in some countries is allowed to be stronger. I don't think it is in the UK, but some bleach heads up towards 10%, so it's twice as strong. Well, you'd need half as much or twice as much water. That's the simple math of it. And that's about the best sort of thing I can get. So if the percentage of that active ingredient is around 5% or a bit less, then it will kill things at that dilution, 1 part bleach to about 8-9 parts water. It doesn't have to be precise, but it does need to be strong enough to do the job, and if it isn't, it won't do the job and you're wasting your flipping time. So people do need to know how strong it needs to be. So that's that. Oh, I'm not crossing these off. Oh, well, I'm actually going down the list at the moment, so it doesn't matter, does it? Right, so that was that. Right, next one, Mark Campbell asked about, well, it's a curiosity and a worry at the same time. Possibly on the grounds that in some videos you may have seen my Vandas soaking in the bucket down there. They're obviously sharing that water. That water is used many times, not necessarily on a daily basis, but quite a mix of plants. I've got 2 Vandas nowadays. I've got my Renantheras. In the good weather, when the temperatures are good, my 3 mounted Phalaenopsis, they go in there. And then I've got my Bangkok Sunset and my thingy, Rhyncho Stylus Gigantea. They all go in that bucket, mainly because in principle they're bare rooted. Yeah? The Phalaenopsis go in there just because it's easier to water the whole plant and the root system. They are reasonable feeders and they do like a constant supply, and they lend themselves to being foliar fed. They actually like it, they take to it. Some plants don't. They don't absorb much at all. Those do. So that water is obviously being shared. And then my watering principle here is that I've got my mixed up feed in there if I'm feeding, yeah, and I bring a bit out here, use it on a few plants, and then get some more. Yeah? And then when that runs down, go and get some more. So yes, I'm sharing it, but not with the whole grow room, which I used to do. I used to fill up the bowl with feed and just use it until it was gone. So that really, really was sharing water. I don't do it like that anymore. There is a risk, always. If I'm flushing, I just have my water bottles out here. Obviously there's no point in walking in and out when it's just clean water. I just pour some in there, but I still do it the same way. I still use it on some. Now there is a risk. You can wash bugs off. Scale can be dislodged when you pour through type watering, and then you pour them into the next pot. Now you've transferred scale. You don't tend to transfer mealybugs or aphids because they tend to be up on the plant, not down in the pot, if you know what I mean, but they may be. I'm not excluding them. You can transfer Fusarium in some cases, but when you use a pour through method, it's less likely. Quite honestly, the best way for Fusarium to spread like bloody wildfire is to have benches with trays on, yeah, that have got some sort of matting that holds some water for humidity purposes, plus allowing the water to soak up into the plants. You only got to put one in that environment and it will eventually get on the lot. Yeah. Fusarium spreads best when the moisture is constant, it's always there, and it gets chance to move. It's not got dozens of legs running like a spider. It's not a fast process. It will get in through damaged tissue easier than it will without. Yeah. So there is a risk in sharing water. Some say you could share a virus. That gets even less likely, simply on the grounds that that is more inclined to get in through damaged tissue and your scissors not being clean from one plant to another. So yes, I share water. I used to worry about it a lot. I don't anymore. I don't believe it's caused me any serious problems. It may have been the downfall of some of my plants. I can't prove it one way or the other. But I cannot not share water. I cannot produce enough RO water. Don't put a load of comments, why don't you collect rainwater? I have done that to death. I do not collect rainwater because round here the roofs are dirty and they don't belong to me. Yeah? it would be dirty water. I'd rather use RO water, which is clean and pure. Yeah? And if your rainwater is dirty when it goes into your storage places, it's going to get worse. So I don't use rainwater. I have no plans. I know there's other ways of collecting. I'm not doing rainwater. Got it? It's too much hassle. Plus it's outside. You know, it's, oh. No, we're not doing that. So that's that one. And the last one, this is Joanne Hellenbrand. Now this came in via an email. I don't mind that, but I would prefer the questions to be in the comments originally so that others see them in their given form, because by the time I've written them down in my shorthand and then said them out loud, I might not actually say them the same as the question that was actually asked. It is a viable method, I suppose. Do Cattleyas need a rest after blooms? Some do. Finding out which ones is damn near impossible. My classic Cattleya book has got that information, but it hasn't got many Cattleyas in there. They're the older, more traditional species, Cattleyas and Laelias. And, you know, given how many there are, there's not many in that book. I've got that information about those. I haven't got many of those. But the information is not often readily available, but there are some that it's really geared up to where they grow. That's where your information is, rather than about the plant. If it comes from a place where most of the species Cattleyas, the resting thing is not normally going to relate to hybrids. They just grow and bloom and grow and bloom, and they'll often do it several times a year because they've got vigour in them. The species tend to bloom once a year. They will have a specific season. They will be a spring bloomer, a summer bloomer, a winter bloomer. They will have a time when they bloom, and the rest is geared up to that. And what you have to think about is you get some that mature their growth and then just don't bloom, and then they bloom quite a bit later. That would be their resting period, and you have to ask why, and the chances are that's when the conditions are harsher. That could be the middle of the rainy season, for instance. There aren't a lot of pollinators flying about in the rain. That's a guess. Yeah? It could be the warmer, drier season, and they're waiting for more milder weather, again for the pollinators to be around when the blooms open. So some will mature a pseudobulb and have a rest and then bloom after it. Yeah, I'm not sure it's the rest that induces those blooms, it's just what they would be used to in the wild. Remember, when they're with you, they're not in the wild anymore. And there are some that basically like a rest after blooming, and that's geared up to they get all their growing and blooming done before the period when the times are not right, not conducive for them. So they don't want to be doing anything in that period. Yeah? So that's what it's really geared up to. They have a rest period because it's imposed on them, not because they actually want it or need it, but it's then with the evolutionary period they've had to have that, it's built into them. So they then have a need for it, or things don't work properly. So yes, some do, not many. So if you grow mainly hybrids, especially the more complex hybrids, you know, where you've got a job to even find out where it comes from, its history, and when you find it, it's this long, I wouldn't worry about it. But some species it's worth trying to find out. I mean, as I said, you can always, if you've got a Cattleya species or a Laelia type, you can always ask, and I'll have a look and see if it's in my book and see what it says. Yeah? But if it's not in there, I'm probably not going to know. And you're just as capable of looking it up as I am. Yeah? So that's that. And can we have a look at one where I cut the rhizome? Should have prepared, shouldn't I? No, not until I've had the rest of my coffee. It's nice to be out here and not be sweltering. Oh, and another thing. I decided that the virtual table display competition that I've been going in for every month, it ought to have me in it. So I actually contrived a picture of the Cattleya harrisoniana, based on the fact that one of the blooms did not have any colour break on it. So I contrived a picture that all the other blooms were not facing the camera, were sort of side on or not quite in focus, and I took a picture of that one bloom and sent that in just to see. It's quite amusing actually. The guy who takes all the emails in, Jeff, he's getting on a bit now, I suppose he's 80 something. But he'd gone somewhere and he'd had a 250-mile drive, and he got back and he was wiped out, and he opened a bottle of wine. His expression was, well, there's no point in keeping it, it'll only go off. I understand the principle, but I do keep mine. So I think he'd finished the bottle of wine when my email arrived. So we had a sequence of emails like, you are number 13, it's unlucky for some, blah blah blah, followed by another one, sorry I got that wrong, you're number 11. Oh, by the way, that plant should do it, that bloom should do okay. And then I eventually got a third one followed up and saying, don't take any notice what I said before, you're number 10. And I've had enough, I'm tired and I'm going to bed. So we do have moments. I love it. Right, plants that have had the rhizome cut. This one is easy to get at, so we'll do that one first. This is my thing. Come on, apple blossom. Something apple blossom, because they've played about with what it starts with. As far as I'm concerned, it's a Varnagara, and that's what I've always known it as, but it's called something entirely different now. I don't need to know what, but this is its current growth area at the front. Big new growth pushing on now. It's decided it's going to do 3 leaves this time. It has moments. Mainly it grows 2 leaves, but we're going to have 3 leaves on this growth. Please yourself, I don't mind. But we cut the rhizome towards the back in there, and it's promptly put up a new growth, which is this one, which looks as though it's only going to have two leaves, and it might not bloom. Whoops. But it's made a start in another part of the plant, and at the point appropriate to this plant, that growth will push out roots. So it's now got some new roots near the back of the plant, which may trigger something else to grow. Yeah? So that's one. That was one that was easy to get at. The big one, can I get at it? We can try, can't we? If you go up there, and you move over there for a minute, and you move over there for a minute, then we can get at you. So this is a big strappy thing. It's very strong pseudobulbs, and it will knock plants over rather than bend. Now this one had the rhizome cut in 2 places. I can't remember where. This was the first one we did. So where there's a growth like this one that's on the edge of the pot, that has got nothing to do with cutting the rhizome, because that would have been back in the middle of the pot somewhere. So this growth out here is its normal growth going on out here, and this is the strong one over here. That also applies over this side. Yeah. So this was a normal lead over here, and this is the new growth that would have happened whatever I did. Yeah. So those are the 2 normal ones. But then the rhizome was cut, and back inside the plant we've got this new growth here. So that one's pushed out farther back up the lead. I think the cut was actually down in there, at that point. So it's pushed out behind there. And then right at the back of the plant here, it's pushed out another one. So each cut produced a single new growth. It can give better results than that. Yeah, a lot of it depends on the strength, vigour and energy of the plant itself. But as far as I'm concerned, that's a major success on the grounds that what was 2 leads is now 4 and will always be so. Chances are all 4 of those will bloom, and then they will all produce a new growth. So I'll have 4 at least always now. So it's getting to the point where the plant could do with dividing. I let it go this year, but on the grounds that this new growth that's right on the edge of the pot, most of its roots will go down in the pot. All of those will, and the other one at the back. This one, I'm just going to have to suffer some root loss. You know, these are aerial. I can't keep those hydrated sufficient to keep them growing all the time. Some of them will stick to the pot and probably survive because the pots are usually damp. And some of them are creeping round the edge and getting in the pot, so I let it go. But this will be its last year before having to have something done. Decision not made, but I suspect we will just rip it out of the pot and start it again as 2 plants. Oh, it's quite a vigorous grower, that one. That's the one that has the large orange blooms and looks very good when it's in bloom. Right. So I'm just looking for all the other plants that go on this shelf. Well, they're not on this shelf. We rearranged these shelves so that there weren't so many plants up here, and they're not all touching each other. They still touch in places, but they're not all squashed up together like they were before. So that's why there's not so many there. Right, where did you come from? You came from up there in the light. Right, so that's today's session. I was just thinking, it would be really nice on this camera if it told me how long the video was. It says 41 minutes, so that's plenty long enough for questions and answers. Hope you've enjoyed that. Those that are watching, that are still here, that haven't subscribed, it would be nice if you did so. I've got a nice rate of increase on my subscribers at the moment. I'd like to maintain it, because if I maintain the rate I'm at the moment, I'm going to hit that 10,000 mark around my birthday time at the end of October. And as I've said, I'm going to do a pretty good giveaway when I get to there, because that's important to me. So if you are watching and unsubscribed and you think you might come back again, then please subscribe. It doesn't cost anything. You press a button and it's done. It doesn't change the world, but it has an effect on my world. And yeah, don't forget the like and all that sort of stuff. I don't normally do all this on the end of my videos or at the start. I leave it to people's common sense. But as I said, it is said, all the psychologists and people like that, they say that people will watch videos over and over, and unless somebody actually says, and don't forget to subscribe, they just won't. So I've said it. But I don't say it every time. And you will notice I've added the subscribe emblem in the bottom right hand corner of my video, so it's there all the way through the video. You've got no excuse, so come on. Click it. It doesn't set the notifications. YouTube haven't got round to doing that yet. All it does is subscribe you to the channel, so you don't start getting loads of emails and all that sort of stuff. So it's good stuff. Thanks for dropping by. We are now devoid of questions for next week, so if you've got some, chuck them in. As long as there's enough, I'll carry on doing these. And sorry it wasn't on Thursday this week. Other things came up that just took over the day. And in the heat we had, there's only so much I was going to do. And that still applies. It's not hot and sticky. Well, it's still a bit sticky today, but the temperature's dropped right down now. Outside, it's probably only about 25. That's not hot. We can live with that. Even the cats have changed their pattern. They've been spread-eagled in the shade out in the garden and hardly ever come in. And they just stay outside because, you know, they're daft. They think it's cooler out there. No, it's not as cooler in here. Not in the grow room, but in the house. But yeah, so one of them sat on the computer now waiting for me to come back. Very patient cats, aren't they? They wait for you all day. Right, so there we go. That's this, whatever number this is, questions and answers. There will be another one next week on Thursday, preferably, as that's the regular day, providing I've got enough questions. So have a think about, you know, anything that's puzzling you or worrying you. Stick them in the comments. Oh, and I will say now, if I've missed anybody, because they've dropped down my huge list of comments, because you see the comments under a video when you're watching it, I see all the comments from all the videos in time date sequence. It's a big list. So I may have missed somebody. If I've missed your comment, apologies. Stick it in again. Have another go. See you next time.